5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. This is episode 27 of the Art of Move podcast with myself, Anthony Manuel, my good friend, Dr. William Braybar. We're out here in the Canadian Rockies trying to find the truth behind human biomechanics and movement in general. Episode 27 is going to be a little bit of a mishmash of multiple topics. It's cool because my Instagram has kind of started to get a little bit more attention, and I'm getting a lot of DMs with a lot of cool questions. So I actually have more sort of community conversation to address, as well as, the topics that Will and I are just talking about on a regular basis and diving into ourselves, right? So we're going to talk about a few different cool ideas. I think the core topic today is going to be the spinal engine. We've had episodes on the spinal engine before, so if you don't know what the spinal engine is, this is going to be less of an episode to kind of talk about what the spinal engine actually is, and is going to be more about what the fitness industry is doing in terms of recognition, or rather lack thereof, of the spinal engine. They're not really recognizing the spinal engine as a thing. Just as a quick recap, because this isn't an episode to explain what the spinal engine is, but just so that you have a working understanding. Spinal engine, in the simplest definition to me anyway, is the idea that the spine is the primary driver of locomotion. It's the core of how we move. It's the center of generating energy and movement in our body. It's this idea that we are supposed to undulate our spine, not keep it as a stiff, passive column. Will, is there any other working definition, sort of prerequisite things that people should come into this episode knowing about the spinal engine other than that?
No, that's pretty much it. It's the two thoughts behind it are either the spine is a passive column, and that's what's been used throughout fitness, throughout physiotherapy. Almost every theory out there was that the spine is a passive column, the legs are doing the work, and the spine is to be kept rigid, and that's how you transfer power the best, right? So spinal engine is really the difference is you move your spine from side to side, and as a result of that side-to-side motion, you have a coupling of the vertebrae turning. Okay, that's key. And that lateral bend in the turn of the spine indicates that you should be turning at the hips as well, and counter-rotating at the shoulders. So they're really very, very different. One, spine's a passive column. The other one, spine is supposed to undulate back, forth, and rotate. We can get into the details, but that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and again, what I said, I think you cut out for a second there. I was just mentioning this isn't going to be an episode describing what it is, as much as talking about why the fitness industry as a whole has such a hard time recognizing the spinal engine. And if you want to talk about the differences in terms of how trainers and strength trainers specifically will see sprint power, for example, someone who works with the spinal engine is going to emphasize fascial elasticity, using stored energy from the elastic quality of your tissues, using this rebounding energy, using efficiency of movement to generate more power, versus if your spine is a passive column, your power has to come from the raw output of your muscular contraction, right? So it's the capacity for your muscles to produce force with your spine as a passive column is going to be the training focus, versus if you acknowledge the spinal engine, you want to become as efficient in your movement, as elastic within your sling systems. There's a totally different training focus that happens when you adopt the spinal engine as your working model for movement. And when you do that, it makes a lot of the power training and strength training and stuff that's very prevalent, like a lot of the sacred cows in the strength training industry, they become borderline irrelevant, if not completely irrelevant, and even harmful, right? So I know you have some hot takes on that.
Yeah, you know what? That was a great way to put it. I don't think I could have put it better myself. It is about undulating your spine back and forth, using the waves of energy. That's where, guys like Weck Method go to come in, and they're like, you're going to use a pressure wave of energy, hips to ribs, basically. And the connection between those two is very, very important. Okay. And it must come with a lateral bend. Right now, the fitness industry I see is starting to recognize that the spine shouldn't be rigid. But the application that is happening that I see is to bend it forward or backwards, right? To maximize the range of motion that you can bend forward, let's say a Jefferson curl or something along those lines, right? Or, back bridges, or I saw ATG doing a side lunge on one of those benches, back extension machines, where you go to your maximum on one side, try to lengthen out and strengthen the tissue.
Yeah.
Exactly, side bending, right? So those are all linear models. Those are all linear movements. The movement is actually a smooth figure 8 motion because you're moving at the same time. The spinal engine is for movement, not for standing still. Okay, so the difference really is you can have your spine as a passive column if you're standing still and lifting heavy weight. But as soon as you start moving, you want that spine to be able to wave back and forth. Think like a smooth fish, but really you'll see this on any mammal. If you look at a dog or a tiger straight on and he's walking towards you, it'll be a smooth side-to-side motion. It'll also be up and down, right? Because that's how their anatomy is. You want your spine to be silky smooth like that, to be able to easily move back and forth. And the tensions and compressions you get from the elasticity of your tissues is really where you gain energy. Okay, so we're actually designed to move back and forth and use the energy waves created by the tissues to help you propel forward. Again, we've done a whole episode on this, so I could unpack it a little bit more, but really the industry's not recognizing the side-to-side motion and the infinity pattern as being even there. It's kind of weird.
I think it's more nuanced than just a side-to-side motion, right? When you're talking about an infinity pattern, most people have a hard time visualizing it because it's not just a side-to-side infinity pattern. You can do this side bend and make an infinity pattern with a side bend a little bit, but there's almost like you're I find when I start practicing this rotary movement through my spine, and I've been practicing it a lot with roping, with locomotion drills, and I've been freeing up a lot of the spine with some of the myofascial release techniques that you showed me up and down my spinal column. When I'm moving into this, I find there's like I guess a GOTA practitioner would call it a gyroscopic motion, where I'm not just moving side to side, but I'm also kind of waving front to back. There's this, like, if you can watch, we record these live on No Filter Network. You can see my shoulders moving front to back, almost like you're rowing a little bit, but your whole spine will undulate in this spiraling pattern.
Here's the key.
It's not just side to side, because if it was just side to side, those side bends from ATG would be really, really useful, right? Like, you would increase the range of motion in that side plane, and you'd be able to kind of move side to side a little bit more freely and have strength in there. But it's a rotary pattern, I find.
The key is your body is looking for balance. The best way to balance is to have your head directly over your foot as you're walking. As you start running and cutting, it might get a little bit more nuanced where your head moves a little bit beyond your foot. But in general, head over foot, you will be in balance at that exact second, okay? At that exact moment in time when your head is over your foot. So your spine has to be able to adapt to that and move side to side. You'll see some of the best athletes in the world walk like this. People think they're trying to show off and look really good, but they might just have a natural sway side to side because that is your balanced step. That's the key. And in order to achieve this, you have to let your thoracic spine go a little bit, okay? And your head is also a gyroscope in itself. So your head may not move as much as your thoracic spine. So there's really a bunch of motions going on, okay? And basically, you're moving your spine to the side just a little bit, and that's pulling the tissues tight on one side, and that's where your thoracolumbar fascia, the fascia at the bottom of your back, will pull tight, and it slings you over to the other side, okay? And it's a dance of tension and compression at the back, at that really, really tight fascia in the back, and you're just letting your spine move from side to side. Now, a lot of people have been trained out of this. I mean, being in school for 8 hours a day, sitting at your desk all day, people are going to get rigid, whether you're training it or not, right? So humans in general, everyone's gone to school for, 15 years. everyone in general has been trained out of this. If you watch indigenous who haven't been touched by Western culture, or some lucky people who are just genetically gifted can still move like this, it looks great. And that's how I design my motions now, is to use that pressure wave back and forth and just let it go. One, I have less tension in my thoracic spine, in my spine in general, because I can let it go. I don't build up tension during the day. And two, I'm always in balance, so my movement has improved, or did improve when I figured this out like this. And I have to give credit to David Weck, who was the first person who really led me on to this. Functional patterns, I saw them doing it, and I saw them talking about it, but I didn't really get it because he wasn't explaining it clearly. Where David Weck is just like, here's a line, you got to have your head over your foot or you're not balanced, period.
And, you know, I think functional patterns does dive quite a bit into that. They talk about a lot about these sling systems and these fascial lines. But you almost have to go into the education of it. Like, you're not going to see it on their Instagram page or like a YouTube channel. He's not going to explain these high level concepts because, you know, reasonably, he wants people to pay you for that, right? Or pay him for that, to learn that stuff. That said, it's like when we're talking about like, you know, guys like David Weck, organizations like GOTA, they're talking about the spinal engine, they're talking about efficiency of movement and this transference of energy. When you're talking about, you know, one side of your back extending and creating this elastic tension and then bouncing back and creating compression on the other side, this is what we were talking about when we say efficiency of movement, because that elastic energy does not require an active contraction of, you don't have to actively flex your muscles to produce this force. This is an elastic force that uses less energy in your body to produce movement, right? So when you're running, you can become that much more efficient if you're taking advantage of this elastic recoil back and forth. And because it's bilateral, because it's on both sides, you can just literally bounce this energy back and forth. That's why we talk about, with that pivot system of the foot, we have those few episodes on the foot. We talk about that energy transfer in the curve, creating, again, a spiral pattern passing back and forth between the 2 feet. It's this passing back and forth, this bilateral exchange of energy that doesn't require your body to expend energy or forcibly contract muscles. It's the force that your body is naturally designed to produce on its own. It's the force of the body's wisdom. Just to turn that into a totally hippie-dippy.
That was for sure. That was a great way to put it. And I really, really got how to use the force, the spinal engine, when I got into GOTA and understood how to use the feet properly. Okay, so first I got into the Weck method and I started doing the ropes. And if anyone wants to learn the spinal engine, get a rope and start just doing a basic underhand figure 8 pattern. That would be the easiest way to do it. Lots of tutorials online for that. But I didn't really understand it until I got GOTA's pressure wave from the lower body, getting the inside ankle bone high and cornering my hip. Okay, I thought linear for the longest time because that's what we were taught at school. That's the best science out there, is cadaver linear science. GOTA is correct. That's what it is. They're cutting things down into components, looking at the components and not seeing the whole pressure wave. Okay, so the linear model will never understand the spinal engine in its fullest, because at a fundamental level, they believe the spine to be a passive column. And I think this is a flaw in the whole system. Somebody contacted me the other day on Instagram and asked me what my reading list would be, right? And I was thinking about it, and I'm like, really, the first thing someone has to learn is the spinal engine. It is the core of where people are going wrong in terms of movement. Because if you don't understand that the spine has to move back and forth, you're going to have a lot of trouble. You're going to waste a lot of time training that anti-rotation stability type of training, because it's everywhere. Everybody's doing it. Okay. So, and most people right now are starting to see that it's not exactly that. So it's going into being able to flex as much as you can and being able to side bend as much as you can. It's not that. It's catching energy from side to side in a smooth motion.
Yeah, and that smooth, again, the smooth quality of this movement pattern, or these biomechanics. I mean, this is something that's fairly new to me. I've always watched I remember being like mesmerized by, say, Ido Portal when I first saw him, right? Like most people who watch Ido Portal move around for the first time, he's moving and he's transferring his energy super efficiently, and he's rolling off the edge of his hand and doing these capoeira moves. And I was like, wow, that's like really smooth transitional movements compared to what I had been doing, which was like super hyper rigid deadlifting, powerlifting movements, or power-based movements with a barbell, or moving really, really quick in a single plane for like a short amount of time. I was very, very smooth at moving a bar from the ground to my hips, like super smooth at it. But, trying to coordinate any movement outside of the frontal or the sagittal plane was very, very difficult for me. It was always, tying my shoes was a rigid endeavor for me for a long time. The smooth, like when you're trying to qualify what smooth movement is, how would you qualify smooth movement? Because to me, it's just an efficient transfer of energy.
It is. Well, you have to be balanced with every step, and you have to transfer the balance from step to step. So for me, running is more of a coordinative effort versus a power effort. For the first half an hour, I'm trying to coordinate where the parts of my body are going, and I'm trying to lead the dance by feeling those coordinations. I start with the feet and the hands, and then I'll work my way up and feel different parts of my body and try to coordinate it as efficiently as possible so that my running becomes ultra efficient. And if I want to turn up the engine from there, I can go ahead and do so, right? But it's not my primary goal anymore. It's to be as smooth as possible. Now, to describe the feeling, it's really as soon as I land, my head is over my foot. I'm ready to come down, like I'm bent towards the side that I'm about to step on, okay? So my foot that I'm about to step, my upper body is bent just slightly enough so my head is over my foot. Then as I land, I try to catch that energy in a smooth pattern, okay? I can almost feel my elbows swooping in as I come down because my ribs are going the other direction and my elbows going the same way. And then I catch myself on the other side, same thing, head over foot, bent towards that side. And I catch that energy and I send it the other way. And I'm making sure my hip pivots just slightly, an overhand motion. When I finish my run, my heel will go away. I kept my inside ankle bone high. I landed in that bow. And that is really the pressure wave from side to side. Okay, so I try to be as smooth as I can between all those motions. You won't be smooth if you don't practice it. It's very much a neurological thing. Like I was talking about yesterday, we were running a little bit, and I was like, this is just like squatting. The analogy is just like squatting. It's very hard to squat well multiple days in a row. If you're a high level, you'll know that you need to really think about what you're doing, your depth, your speed, how tight you're feeling that day. People will recognize that. And that is 1/50th as neurologically demanding as running. There's way more going on. So it's the same mentality. You're perfecting it, except that with running, there's way more variables. And it's more of a natural type of motion, and squatting is more a specialized type of motion.
Yeah, and like when you're, the squat analogy, the way I think about it is squatting certain weights becomes really neurologically demanding, right? You can feel nervous system burnout if you're lifting at close to your 1 rep max all the time, unless you're Bulgarian, apparently. But the whole thing is like you can squat with perfect form at say 135, and then you have to like focus on keeping your body tense at 225. And then when you get to those 3 plates, that's when you have to really hyper focus on keeping your form down. And the closer and closer you get to your 1 rep max, the more you're at risk for technique breakdown. The running equivalent of that for me is if you're keeping technique and structure super efficient at like maybe a 4.5 mile per hour jog, but maybe you start to break down at 5.5 miles per hour, right? Like you start picking up the pace a little bit more, and you start to lose that sort of bowing action in your leg, and your ankles start to or your arch in your foot starts to collapse a little bit. The faster you start to, if you break out from a jog to a sprint, that level of demand and output from your body is going to be neurologically demanding, and you're going to be more at risk for technique breakdown. It's like basically you're getting closer to your quote 1 rep max neurological demand on your body, right? So you'll have a threshold in which your technique and your structure will start to break down if you haven't trained it, which I think is why, you know, a lot of GOTA training ends up being training to keep your inside ankle bone high. It's for, you know, like coding into your body to hold a bow under stressful conditions. They do a lot of sled pushing. They do a lot of holding these bow positions against a wall and learning how to corner them properly, how to keep your inside ankle bone high as you're doing cornering. It's a lot of locomotive drills, and it's the ability to maintain these positions, these joint angles, and be able to create these pressure waves, these efficient pressure waves under stressful conditions. I think that's the difference, right? For a lot of strength training, it's how do you produce more force, period. But with something like a GOTA, or, you know, I haven't explicitly done WEC method, but I know they do a lot of training where every step is a rep. It's how do you create consistent structural stability to support these efficient movements, to support this coordination of movement.
Looking back at my running about 2 years ago when I was exclusively doing WEC method, as soon as I got that cue of head over foot, my running improved. I felt way more smooth. Everything was going great. It felt like fun to run again, because once you get it, you're on balance. You can start hopping over things. You can start, you know, your efficiency from side to side is amazing. I could spin at full speed. I could do things like that because I was understanding how to keep my balance at a faster pace. It wasn't until I got the GOTA footwork that it really all came together, because the inside ankle bone high is the level up. I think Adrian the other day said it correctly. He was talking about inside ankle bone high being on the proper part of your foot and understanding how GOTA does the balance from the bottom up. That is the level up for most people who rope, but it's also the level up for most runners. You can run the other way. If I look back 2 years ago, my inside ankle bone was going low on the right. Okay, so I have had a lot of injuries there. I didn't think it was as big a deal as I do now. Like I try to not let it happen. However, when I was running yesterday, the ground is uneven. It's, you know, ice over here on the trail. Yeah. So you have to be extra vigilant. And certain times, you know, when I hit uneven terrain, my ankle bone's letting go. That's fine, because I'm trying to level up, right? And seeing those things allows me to know when I'm breaking down. Okay, yeah. So filming yourself every once in a while, watching yourself run is a very, very good idea.
And, you know, like the importance of it is hard to explain unless you've experienced it. I have a friend who has had major ankle and knee issues for, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 years at this point. And it stopped him from doing a lot of physical activity. He's thrown all kinds of stuff at it. And I just remember, like, I visited him, it must have been probably September or late August. And, you know, still big swollen ankle. And finally I was like, hey man, do you want to try this GOTA stuff? Do you want to, like, I'll show you a few movements and you can try them out. And he was doing them for 4 days. And I don't know if you can see, but like, he sent me pictures. This is his left ankle. There's no swelling whatsoever. And that's his right ankle. It looks almost identical. You can see his inside ankle bone is starting to climb a little bit, but he sends me a voice message, and he's like, I've been doing physio for 4 years, and like, I haven't been able to get the swelling down. I've done this for 4 days. I've kept my inside ankle bone high. I've been doing some of these calf exercises to keep it there. And I've been doing some of these movements to kind of code my body back into these patterns. And in 4 days, my ankle swelling is down, and I can actually access here. I'll just play the voice message so that you can kind of hear it.
More exciting developments. My left ankle, which is the first picture, is usually a lot more swollen, a lot more janky, a lot more difficult to maneuver. But look at them. They are so much more fucking similar. It's amazing. From like 4 days of consistently doing this stuff, it is working the muscles in ways that haven't been worked before to help correct the injuries.
And that's
nice.
That's you know, like that's again, 3 years of physio, doing all kinds of other stuff for it. And in 4 days, he applies these principles. And again, what I think is happening is he's actually transferring his energy efficiently, and he's not loading his joints in a way that don't want to be loaded. The inflammation is going away.
That's amazing. And it's really like, That's what Goda talks about is stopping the bleeding. It's true. It's like, if you don't understand how to get your ankle bone up, and as a professional, I didn't really understand how important that cue was. It's really stopping you from collapsing and letting those tissues just come down on each other. So every step, he's sandwiching his tissues because he probably didn't have control there. And now that he's thought about it, he was probably lucky enough that it was more of a neurological cue than a mechanical failure, right? So in someone like that who just understands immediately, oh, I just have to climb this up a little bit and it won't be pinching tissue anymore. Amazing. Now I'm not swelling every day, right? So that's great stuff.
And what I like about him as an example too, you know, he's not a super fit person. He doesn't have a great history of training. He would always injure himself whenever he tried weightlifting, so he mostly stayed out of the gym. A lot of his stuff is just walking. He's an actor, so he would do like some acting and some, you know, physical embodiment stuff with acting, but he's not athletic at all, right? Like he doesn't participate in sports, and his body is, you know, riddled with the same dysfunctions of modern Western culture. So he was kind of a blank slate. You know, when I'm trying to apply some of these concepts, I'm trying to actively reverse tensions in my body that are created from improper training and training in improper alignment, building tension and building dysfunctional muscle is what I'm starting to see it as in different places in my body, based on, you know, like my goals of getting freaking jacked and super strong. So I'm coming from a different angle where I'm trying to decompress and I'm trying to release. He's building tension and building strength where he's never done any of it, and his body is like, he's like, man, I feel my glutes and my ass like I've never felt it. Like I've tried, you know, he would try to do like the at-home booty building workouts where he's doing like the hip thrusts into the air and stuff, and he's never been able to feel his glutes. And I got him to do like, you know, some basic child rockers, some Seiza lifts and some basic stuff. And it's just that he's putting his joint angles in the right place, which is forcing his body to produce tension in the right locations, right? And this is the whole thing, is like when you focus on biomechanics and you focus on and stacking your joints and creating the right joint angles, you create tension in the right places while staying relaxed in other places. But you're not supposed to be overly tense. You're not supposed to have these neurological holding patterns of like neurotic tension.
It's very true. And a lot of that is promoted by lifting. Not like lifting in itself is really a specialized activity, but it's looked upon by most people as the thing to do to keep yourself healthy. It's specialized in that you have to keep yourself rigid as you do it. So you're going to mold that way eventually. And the thing is, most people are already there. Okay. Some people aren't, but most people are. You're already too rigid in your movement, and you don't need to add on to that. You need to get back to the originally how you would do it if it was natural. Side to side motions, letting elasticity, getting reps in that motion. The more reps you do with the spinal engine, the better you will be at it and the more you will adapt to it. Okay, so it's getting back to it that's the key. If you keep adding things that are going to make you stiff and rigid, then you're going to get stiff and rigid. If you do, let's say, lengthening exercises to lengthen out that stiffness, you're still not getting the coordinated movements and the elasticity that you're going to be getting from using the spinal engine. And that's what I love about Goda, WEC method, functional pattern stuff, is that it's thinking along those lines to get those tensions and compressions in your body to be smooth as possible, to be able to move using the elasticity of your body versus just rigidity and power.
Yeah, and this is like, this is thinking in biological terms of movement, right? You're not just thinking in terms of we understand how the body will adapt to specific stimulus, right? And that's the basis for a lot of training. It's like, okay, I want this result. I want big muscles, and I know that if I train specifically and I fatigue the muscle and I work to failure, or I exceed the weight that's moved by this muscle, then according to the said principle, it will grow, right? And we have this external input, and we're looking at this body that we live in, and we are our bodies, and we look at it as this mechanism that we can throw inputs at so that it'll respond the way that we want to. I find that like functional patterns, Goda. I don't know a ton of Weck method stuff, right? But I feel like it's looking at the biological basis for movement. It's either looking at how we evolved to move, or it's observing movement as it occurs in nature. A lot of Goda principles were derived from observing, like you said, indigenous cultures that were untouched by Western society and its trappings. They look at babies fresh out of the womb and how they are inclined to move, how intuitively they're trying to locomote their body. There is a lot of that spinal movement. There is that bowing and cornering action that they teach. They're observing nature. And this idea of trying to align yourself to nature is something that I'm playing with a lot, because in a lot of my training pursuits, it was sort of trying to impose my will on my own body, and not even necessarily my will. It was sort of like a superficial will created by what I thought would benefit my social perception. It was how can I generate status through imposing, these certain stimuli on my body. I want to have, I want to be stronger. I want to have the bigger muscle. I want to look more jacked, and I want to communicate higher social status. So I'm going to impose, and that it's not just the training stimulus. It was the nutritional stimulus too. It would be like the high stimulant pre-workouts. It was the fat burners. It was starving myself, like being in a crazy calorie deficit or fasting for long periods of time so that I could be, dick skin ripped. It was, it was all this crazy stuff that I was doing, trying to impose my will. Sorry for that. But now the mentality of there is actually an objective reality that I can align myself to. And if I do that, I'm actually going to experience way more health, freedom, less pain, more enjoyment, and more alignment to the world. It's at large, right? And it's, again, I'm cautious of using hippie language because it turns a lot of people off. I am at heart a huge hippie. I've studied more like what, Eastern philosophy and had my own, journey in spirituality and feeling at one with nature and one with the universe, man. But like, there is something to be said for the fact that you are a human being, and human beings are a part of nature. And as a part of nature, there are objective ways that we are aligned to natural law. And if we can align our training and our movement practices and our nutrition practices to align with natural law and to align with our biology, then we're going to just have a better time overall.
Absolutely. There's a couple points there. One, what you said earlier about, making your muscles bigger and all that, that is a specific input that you're getting, and we know how to do it. Humans know how to get bigger muscles. But it doesn't get you better movement. That's the thing. It won't. So if you want better movement that's more efficient, that won't wear you down, that you can keep for life, I think that is a new goal to go with. I think that is the way to go if that's what you want, a healthy body for the rest of your life, that you can actually move better as you age. Okay, like you're going to be working balance, you're going to be working the elasticity of your tissues versus just getting the muscle bigger. That ends at some point. It makes you rigid, and you'll be old and rigid and not able to switch over and do more elasticity training. So the younger you get into it, the better. But it's more of a I don't know what the saying is, but you learn when you're older what you should have learned when you were younger. It's like if you can start being smooth with your movement as you're young and let go a little bit of the just aesthetic bigger look, then you'll get a lot out of it. And you can do a little bit of that too, right? Like you can get big muscles, nothing wrong with that. However, I urge you to also understand that movement is something you can build just like your muscles. The second thing was talking about nature. The best way to be in nature is to actually go out in nature. Like I'm fortunate to live in the mountains here. I go out, no technology, shirt off, barefoot, walking in the mountains through the forest. Like that, natural rivers, the whole deal, wild animals. That is actually being in nature, and that brings you back to center, actually having to go out and do those things. Not everyone has, is living in a mountain town or anything like that. What I see from a lot of people is going to the gym barefoot or, doing things that are kind of mimicking nature in the gym. No, you have to go out in nature and actually experience. Like, go out barefoot. If you're going to go out barefoot in the gym, try it in nature. You will learn a lot more with your step. So that's just an insight I had in kind of what I see.
Well, I mean, a lot of modern life requires you, like when you're talking about mimicking nature. While I'm filming this, I have this this sun lamp because I'm in a room with no windows. Like, my office has no windows in my home, and much to my chagrin. But I make a point of going outside every day for an hour or two at least, minimum. I try. I'm my standard now since we talked last is 2 hours outside minimum. I don't always manage to do that. But I have a sun lamp to at least emulate the spectrum of light that I would see if I was outside all day, right? So instead of just having like an LED overhead, I'm trying to create that similar stimulus, and it's not going to be the same as the sun, period. I'm not going to get that same UV. There's no way, some lamp that I'm plugging into my wall is going to emulate the same effect of, at most it's going to, just mitigate the effects of seasonal effectiveness disorder mildly, but I'm still trying to get outside as much as possible. I think that a lot of life in general, we become disconnected from feeling like a greater part of a whole, and being a greater part of a whole. I mean, this is somewhat philosophical, right? And it can sound really trite. It's been said over and over and over again to the point where it almost doesn't mean anything, because most people can logically wrap their heads around it, but don't experientially feel it as being part of a whole. Like, I know who I am because I have other people in my life and I have relationships. Like, my personality doesn't exist without relationships. The oxygen that I breathe is a result of the trees producing oxygen, and the carbon dioxide that they take in is from us breathing it out. There is a yin and yang to everything, and individuality, like isolated individuality, does not exist. Like, you cannot have a self without another. You cannot have a human being without its environment. A human being is not it. Like, we don't come into the world, we come out of the world, right? And this is like the language that we use. Like, I came into the world with blah 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 blah. It's like, no, you were born from the world. Like, our whole bodies are built from materials that that are from the earth. Like, we eat animals that ate the plants that absorb the sunlight. It is all one unified system, and there are objective laws that rule this unified system. And the more that we can align to these unified laws, to these global, these universal principles of nature, then the healthier we are, the more longevity we're going to experience, the more happiness we're going to experience. And I've started thinking way more holistically, moving into a movement practice versus trying to force my will upon my own body with hard training. Now, I do want to say, though, with a movement practice, I do think that there is something to be said for still training hard and still pushing your boundaries and still, creating certain amounts of tension, and, like there is an anti-aging effect to having resistance on your body. It's the type of resistance that you put on your body. You can align the resistance to sort of be aligned to natural principles, but you still need some form of resistance. Without challenge, we have no reason to adapt or to grow or evolve as beings. So in terms of your own movement practice, I know you work in terms of a lot of complexity, but do you think that there's still a pretty high importance on challenging yourself and exceeding your former capacity, or are you kind of moving away from that mentality a bit?
I'm moving away from it because I was so far in the other direction for a long time, like being competitive with doing it with myself, with others, the whole deal, right? So now it's more of like an individual pursuit. But yeah, I do it's not a 1 rep max that I'm going for anymore. It's more complexity in my motions, still sticking to the same principles that I talk about all the time. So 1 rep max for me will be a more complex motion that I get, whether it be something I'm practicing in martial arts, or, something with the ropes, or being able to run faster, smoother, things that I play with the position of my hands as I run to be able to coordinate that. I'm going to that level. where I want to know what my fingers are doing as I'm running, you know? So that is more along the lines of where I'm going versus just output, and, you know, measuring against a external variable, right? So
Right.
there's nothing wrong with lifting too. It's a great, fun sport. It's like football and lifting, you know, soccer, they're all sports and they're all fun. Like I had a great time doing gymnastics. I had a great time doing Ido Portal. I had some of the most fun moments of my life in the gym lifting, right? But
Yeah.
I mean, I have to kind of move on because I'm getting at that age where it's, you know, I'm upper 30s and I need to keep my body going, and having movement as my number one, movement and gait as my number one variable there, what I strive for, that's going to bring me a lot more joy than lifting something really heavy and then being tense and in pain all the time, right? So not that everyone's in pain, but a lot of people are tense. I'd say that most lifters are very, very tense and have a hard time letting that go.
Well, it's not just, well, I mean, lifting is literally programming tension into your nervous system. So it is specific. I was going to say it's not specifically lifters who are tense. It's like, but that's kind of literally what they're training themselves into. So I think a lot of people do just hold tensions throughout their body. This is, you know, one of the aha moments that I had with you when we were doing our myofascial release stuff, when you showed me the stuff, when we did our podcast episode on it, was this idea of not needing tension in every part of my body. It's this idea of like, oh, you know, like actually not having tension, having that nice middle ground between structural stability, but also the ability to completely relax a muscle. That's huge. Because again, that ability to kind of get a little bit of slack, especially into my slings, will help produce that elastic force too. I want to have that recoil. I don't want it to be so stiff and rigid that I can't bend into it and take advantage of that sort of elastic force. And plus, being tense all the time is just uncomfortable. You know, like I'm still working through my traps, which were like so chronically tight that they were just rigid rocks from, again, deadlifting, doing Olympic lifts, doing all, like basically lifting everything with my traps. I even found a picture of myself doing a back lever on the gymnastics rings, and it looked like I was holding myself up with my traps almost. It was funny. But being able to develop the skill of actively relaxing and actively taking the tension and creating some slack so that you have a little more give in your tissues, that's a skill on its own too. Oh,
that's a huge skill. That's basically what I'm trying to master now, is to be able to feel every part and know where I'm getting tension from, where I can relax, where I coordinate the tension from. So a lot of the things I do is like coordinative efforts throughout the body, when to relax, when to tense. And that's what you really want. You want to be tense and be able to create quote unquote strength when you need it, but shut it off immediately after, right? So that's kind of where I'm going with that. And like you said, I have the same problem. Up on the traps, I used to shrug 6-7 plates with straps on, you know, something that I couldn't even handle with my hands, just to get the jack traps and the big neck, right? So that really, you know, I was doing that for probably over 10 years, and that area still gets tense very easily. When I do crawling work now, doing animal crawls, lifting up my neck in that position is very difficult. Still to this day, even though I practice it all the time. So when I'm crawling, a lot of the times I'll practice trying to get tension out of that area. And that'll be my primary focus for crawling, because that's what I need. It won't be my only focus, but it'll be what I primarily focus on. So that'll be a 1 rep max for me there. How much can I make the tissues longer and decompress them at that area as I do a movement where my body naturally wants to tense that area? Because over and over and over again for years, I did tense that area.
Yeah, and I'm still going through the same thing. A lot of my crawling work, I have to go really slow. I've actually regressed a lot of crawling work because I find that I do just overcompensate with my traps and wing my scapula quite a bit just to hold myself up. And honestly, regressing things to the point where you can do them correctly is really hard on the ego. Like, feeling that you have the strength to do stuff, but you're doing it out of alignment, or you're doing it improperly and you're activating the wrong areas and stuff. Like, that's That's extremely hard for someone who had the attitude of just like, I'm going to blast through no matter what, right? Like that was the old attitude where it's like, oh, I have the strength to lift this, even if I, I might have to cheat just a little bit, but
Well,
yeah.
In a basic bear crawl right now, like the difference is there's what I feel internally and what you may see externally. So let's say I do a bear crawl on paper, on video, it'll look great, right? It's like, oh, that's almost a perfect bear crawl right there. But inside, I have tensions in certain places that I want to get rid of as I do that bear crawl, right? So for me, it's like, yeah, the external variable is there and it looks good, but I still don't have it down. I still can't even progress past this basic bear crawl because I have tensions that I want to relax before I move on to the next level.
I think that's why like pre-movement fundamentals include not just understanding posture and not just understanding like how you can align yourself, but once you're aligned there, being able to identify where you're holding tension unnecessarily, that wants to pull you out of that. Like if you line yourself up into perfect posture and then relax, you can feel what part of your body starts tensing up to pull you back into that misaligned posture, and then you can sort of release those tissues with some sort of myofascial release technique, and then apply some gentle movement afterwards to align yourself back up. That's sort of what I've started to do a little bit more, is like, okay, here's my posture. What's tight as I'm holding this? If I relaxed, what part of my body pulls me back into poor posture? If I pull myself back into that poor posture with, say, like I feel my psoas or my hip flexors or something, pull my pelvis in a certain direction, or my traps pull my anterior delts pull my shoulders forward a little bit more, then I'll release that, and then I'll get back into that posture, and I'll do some, a little bit of movement to kind of hammer it back into my nervous system.
So in the office, like as a chiropractor, I work with people in pain all the time. And one of the things that I see is not understanding how much tension they're in. Okay. So in general, I see this quite a bit, and it almost seems like a miracle within like a couple of treatments for some people who have that next level tension in their back, but don't really understand it. Just getting them to understand it by getting deep into the muscles and letting them relax gives a major, major relief from somebody who's been like, this happens over and over and over again. People in pain for years. In like 2 treatments, it's switched. It's like, I'm not doing anything mechanical. Your problem was never mechanical. Your problem was you were so tense, you didn't know how to relax that area. And you're over a hump where you just can't even do it yourself. So you're so tense in that area, and your body's so used to keeping it clenched. It is really like clenching. And being able to relieve that clenching just for a small period and feel what that's like, then the key is to move that area gently afterwards. Will allow your body to reset the tone to that area. Okay? If you repeat this process, relax the area, move the area gently. Relax it, move it gently. That is how you tone down tensions in your body that are too high. Okay? And targeted rolling is really the key. And I shouldn't call it rolling. Compression is the easiest method. Okay? Compressing and knowing where to target by going super deep. You have to go super deep, okay? But you have to be targeted, and you have to understand where the anatomy is, which, I mean, that's where the professional comes in, right? Or understanding the anatomy, you have to go to that length, okay? So someone who's really, really tense, and a lot of people are in this category, a lot of lifters, you have to understand how to relax the tension, then move the area afterwards. Certain movements will be better than others. Goda really has this down. FRC really has this down, the principle of moving that exact joint that you just released. Okay. I like to do, what I used to do is relax the area. Let's say it's the low back, right? I'd relax the low back and then show somebody like a functional range conditioning type of movement where you just move your pelvis back and forth under that lower amount of tension. But now I'm finding Goda movements to be much more effective. So, relax the area and move the area afterwards gently, your body over a period of weeks. sometimes months, will relax that tone, and that's how you reset nervous system tension in reality.
Yeah, and when we're talking about the spinal engine and the spine being one of the prime drivers of locomotion, forward locomotion, if you've spent years conditioning your body to be that rigid passive column, maybe through lifting, through stabilizing your midline, doing literally anti-rotation training, like that's a big thing in the strength and conditioning world, this anti-rotation training, these things you'll hold like a band against like a rotational force, and you'll literally train your body out of being able to rotate and bend. So if you've invested all this time into conditioning your nervous system to be rigid, this is kind of how you start to free yourself up. We are putting together the Art of Move course where we're going to go very in depth in terms of how you can use myofascial release techniques to get those segments of the spine, to release those segments of the spine, and to create more free movement and utilize the spinal engine. We're going to actually do a detailed breakdown because we can't really do that on a podcast, right? We could try, but most people are listening to this on Spotify, or they're listening to it on iTunes, or they're watching it on No Filter. And by the way, guys, for the people who are watching live, feel free to ask questions in the live chat, or you can hit the knock button. We can actually have a discussion in real time. You can ask questions and we can talk about other stuff. But if you've spent all this time creating rigidity through your midline, developing the ability to stay relaxed, like I'm working on this for like over a year, and I've only started to make leeway in my thoracic spine. Like I've been deadlifting with poor posture with a hyperkyphotic thoracic spine for years, and I'm only just now starting to get a little bit of articulation in that T-spine segment, and it has to be this almost painstaking process of teach it to relax, move it in that range. Teach to relax, move it in that range. You're reconditioning your nervous system. Your nervous system is literally holding patterns. And training is just conditioning yourself to hold patterns in certain ways. That's why having a biological basis for your training, thinking about how your body is supposed to move, and biomechanically aligning your training to proper biomechanics will create tension in the right places without creating neurological holding patterns in the wrong places that will create rigidity and inefficiency of energy transfer.
That is a great way to put it, right? Like, if efficiency in energy transfer is really the key, and you can't be efficient if you're rigid. It's just not going to happen with anything but straight line running. Like you can get away with it if you're running straight line. Okay. If your external goal is a time variable, you can pack on a huge amount of muscle and just go straight. Right. That works. And that's what a lot of sprinters are doing, and a lot of runners who just have to go straight. But if you want to cut, run, be able to, get up, down, all that, there has to be a fluidity in motion. Okay. And there's an easy way to start this with, I would say, go to principles, the spinal engine, and myofascial release over a period of time to be able to recondition the nervous system to do smooth motions in higher and higher complexity. Okay, so right now you would probably be able to, like, I've seen you rope, and you're able to rope and be smooth in basic patterns, but I bet that once the patterns get a little bit more complex, your spine's going to tighten up. Yep. Because it's never seen that complexity before. So you literally have to introduce it to more and more complex motions and grade it kind of like you grade lifting heavy weights and getting bigger muscles. Okay. It has to be done in a sequence. And I looked at myself about 2 years ago, maybe it was 3 years ago, when I started roping, and I was trying all these twirls and fancy maneuvers, and I can see my core just get so rigid that I wasn't able to pull these moves off. I didn't know why. Now I'm able to twist, move, because my core is let go, and I shouldn't even say core. I'm using my spinal engine, and I'm working with the tensions and relaxations of my muscle to guide my body and coordinate efforts versus just trying to power through things. Okay, so that's really the difference there.
Yeah, and that I think the importance of increasing complexity of movement in using the spinal engine over time, especially where using myself as the example, I have conditioned myself for rigidity for so many years. What's going to happen is if I have a slip or I have a fall or I have something, like my tendency is going to be to go to whatever I spent the most time inputting into my nervous system at a high threshold, right? So like if I'm slipping on ice, I'm going to get rigid like I'm about to do a deadlift, because I think to protect myself, I have to brace my core and make my spine super rigid. In a situation where I want to, bend or utilize some elastic force or do, live my life, my life is more than just walking forward, right? It's more than just moving forward in a straight line, which, I've started to really, really rebuild my gait. But like, if you want to be able to turn around or like literally change directions, and being able to work with this fluid dynamic, this fluid efficient transference of energy, then like you said, changing the patterns. It's funny because you said it's like, oh, if you add more complex movements, I'm sure you start to get rigid. I film myself doing a basic rope flow, and I'm super fluid. I got my transfer of energy, got my footwork going. But then when I turn, as soon as I do the pivot to turn around and switch directions, it's like I'm on it's like I'm on a dolly or something. I'm like rigid and turning around, and then I relax and I go back into it. But it's learning to maintain that fluidity as I'm transferring that's given me the best gains in terms of living my life, right?
Well, I agree. And that's basically the complexity I train now, is just that. More and more complex motions, being able to be in balance, right? Like that is the key. Head over foot. If at any point my head is over my foot and I'm in balance, basically, right? So in higher speed, higher complex motions, I'm making sure that happens. And I'm also using the spinal engine, my spine moving. If it's going from the right to the left, my head's headed in that direction, I have to work with that momentum and guide my body that way. I can't guide my body the opposite motion of my spine. Do you know what I mean? So it's really, you have to coordinate that effort. And that's
so
really
here's an interesting, like I have a question. I want to get your take on this. Sorry to interrupt, but like
no problem.
I didn't want to lose this thought. We're talking about the difference between, in spinal engine theory, we're talking about using that elastic energy, allowing the spine to undulate and transfer the force very efficiently, where the passive column model uses force output. Do you think you could do something like use a sled or some other forward moving implement and work within that sort of undulating, that efficient transference of energy, and build force output on top of that? Or is the force output training, will that train you out of elasticity, and will that make you more rigid, even if you're training within that pattern?
No, there's definitely ways. Like if you were to push I love sled pushing. It's great. You put a lot of tensions on your body, and you can, as long as you let your spine move from side to side, every time your foot lands, your head is in alignment with the foot. If you're pushing a sled, your head's going to be forward of your foot, but you still have it in alignment. You're stopping yourself from just keeping that rigid middle head and just driving with your legs. That's what you want to avoid. However, at some point, it has to be turned into motions without weights. Okay? Everybody's obsessed with the weight. Wait, I have to add weight to it. It's like, well, you have to add force to it. Okay? So the weight will help you understand force, help you build tissue, but eventually you want to do it unweighted with just you, your body, yourself, and you coordinating the efforts that you can without any external variables. The weight is just an external variable. Your body is seeing you as lifting something, an external object. You're getting good at lifting external objects if that's what you're doing all the time. But you're with your body doing motions alone, okay? Whenever you're around, like in real life, unless you're a mover or something like that, right? But 99% of the population, you're using your own body during the day without external loads, without picking up weights off the ground. So basically, you got to bring it to your own body and coordinate the efforts eventually.
We talked about the biological basis for how much weight we would have lifted, say, on the African savanna as hunter-gatherers, right? Like at the most, you're killing like an 160-pound like antelope or something, and you're carrying it with someone else over your shoulder, but you're not squatting it for reps. You're not lifting it up and down off the ground over and over and over again. You're probably lifting something up and then carrying it, and that would be the extent of the heavy weight that you're really in, at least from an indigenous culture, like an early hominid perspective. That would be the most weight that you would be lifting. Maybe you're wrestling with other humans and jockeying for dominance in your social hierarchy, and there's a little bit of a grappling element, and you're throwing each other around. But that's wrestling, that's grappling, that's not lifting.
You hit the nail on the head there, because wrestling, I think, is natural. Like, obviously kids all do it, right? Like, every kid wants to kind of like wrestle a little bit or get physical. That's how you're learning to, manipulate yourself, push external loads. But you're really just having fun wrestling around, right? So I think wrestling is great. I think that's a really good way to express power through your body without external objects all the time. Same with boxing, right? I can outlet a lot of power doing those, using the spinal engine, using rotary force in my body. And it's very, very easy on the joints. Love boxing, love kickboxing, all that stuff, right? I can't remember. You said something that
I just want to make another point. When you were talking about wrestling being this fun thing, I had this other thought of how even like someone kind of pins you and you're trying to wriggle yourself free. That sort of wriggling and that undulation, like picture a kid getting tickled and there's just like they're freaking out and they're wiggling around and they're literally letting go of nervous tension in their body. In the same way as you see like a gazelle that just got like wrecked by a lion but managed to get away, it's like traumatized. His whole body is stiff and it'll like shake. You can see sometimes it looks like they're having a seizure on the ground or something. Their whole body will shake out this nervous tension so that they won't hold these tense patterns in their body, and they'll be able to return to their normal states. Like doing these patterns that make you undulate and shake and stuff, they will naturally release tensions in your body that aren't supposed to be there.
Yeah, like I've heard theories. I don't know this for certain, but shivering is a great way to release energy. When people are tapping their feet as they're sitting there, they're releasing nervous energy there. That's actually a good thing. However, it's looked upon, you're nervous, like in a cultural sense, right? Like it's not normal to sit there and kind of shake yourself. So a lot of people will keep rigid and, that builds up tension over time. I've heard a lot of those theories and I kind of buy into them. Have you ever seen trauma release exercise where people will literally shake? I can't remember where I saw it, but basically a lot of shakes are going on and it's releasing trauma from deep down. I don't want to get into it too much, but I've seen similar things that you're talking about, shake out the energy, right? And I actually do this as a practice. I'll make my body super rigid, try to compress every muscle I can, and then release it and shake as much as I can out. From the head to the toe, letting everything go as loose as possible, as tight as possible, loose as possible, tight as possible, right? And that's a good way to know where your nervous tension's at and release a lot of nervous tension. What you were saying before about lifting too, I do think you should be an expert at lifting. I do think that you should put some time in to at least be able to lift enough weight that you can do household things, safely and comfortably. Lift a couch, lift a box spring or something like that. If you're going past that, lifting 400 pounds, now, unless you're the biggest guy in the world, you're really hyper specializing in lifting external objects off the ground in a linear plane. That's what you're going to get good at, and that's what you're going to adapt to. But it's not what humans were adapted to do, in my opinion. So you're going to be losing something somewhere.
Yeah, and I think when you're talking about like applicability of lifting, I picture lifting sandbags and stuff, or dragging sandbags. My partner's a firefighter, and she will, she won't give up an element of lifting because she literally has to drag bodies. She has to lift heavy hoses and she has to move a bunch of stuff around. So having work capacity there, you have to kind of think about your life and the function. For me, I always want to have the ability to lift someone and carry them if I need to. I had a situation once where a friend of mine, we all walked out into the middle of the forest where there was this really cool lake that you could jump off a cliff into. And I had one friend, I was sitting up there, I was playing guitar for a while, and she was kind of waffling on the edge. All my other friends had all jumped in, and they jumped far enough. And they're like, "It's okay, Jess, come on, you can jump off." Like, and she's just, I don't know. And she's there for half an hour, kind of like, do I do it? Do I do it? And finally she kind of like, she did the nervous half jump, right? And she like held herself back just enough when she jumped off because she was so nervous. She didn't jump out quite far enough, and she scraped her foot. So this was actually a feat of movement, because all my friends climbed up in different parts of the cliff, and we all like Jerry chained her all the way up the cliff. We literally like passed her up the cliff because she couldn't climb up. Her foot was like torn right open. And I carried her 45 minutes on my back through she couldn't walk. Like, and we were 45 minutes into like on this forest trail in the middle of the woods, and we had to drive her to the hospital. So I literally took her on my back and carried her through the woods. I would love to have a level of strength and stability in my body and joint integrity and all this stuff that if I need to do that, I can, right? So that's almost excessive. That's more than most people will like need, quote unquote, or most people won't find themselves in a situation where they have to carry their friends out of the woods.
and there's better ways to lift than others, right? Like, I would keep the go-to principles as I lift. I would lift in a bow. I would lift weight forwards, not up and down for the most part. That's how I would approach lifting if I was going to lift. However, and again, I'm an outlier. I don't really feel like I need to lift so much anymore. So that's where I'm at. But yeah, by all means, if you want to have a base level of strength, if you're a firefighter, if you're somebody who needs that strength, you got to do it. Like, there's no other way around it, right? Like, you have to adapt to what you need. So adapt to what you need, right?
Yeah, in a big way. And that's, you know, the what you need thing. I think most people don't think in terms of what they need, because what they think they need is a jacked body to attract a partner or to get social status, right? I think that's like, most people aren't thinking, like, I found our conversation with Adrian Vino very, very interesting. And for those who don't know, if you haven't listened to the episode, Adrian was a bodybuilder, and he stopped bodybuilding more or less altogether and started doing GOTA, and he feels amazing. And for him, it's like, again, it's feeling this alignment to his body's natural mechanisms, and he feels great in his own body. And he kind of talked about the motivations that he had to prove other people wrong and to, you know, be the bodybuilder on the front of the page, and talking about these motivations where he's like, you know, he's gotten older now, and he's like, man, I just don't give a shit. Like, I don't care about trying to prove other people wrong. I just want to feel good. I just want to be in my body and live in my body and to have good movements. Talking to him was really enlightening, because for me, if you were to ask me at 23 years old, when I was training my hardest, probably, Anthony, why do you want to deadlift 500 pounds? I'd be like, I don't, because it's sick. Like, because I want to. It's like, because I can, you know, like I want to be strong. I wouldn't have a good answer other than like, because I want to. And I wouldn't, and if you said, well, why do you want to? I wouldn't be able to answer you. I don't know why I wanted to deadlift 500 pounds or even 600 pounds down the line. You know, like for me, it was like, I don't know, because to flex on my friends, you know, I had no idea why I wanted those goals. And, you know, now after having had shoulder surgery, after, you know, enduring a ton of misery in terms of injuries and putting my body through hell basically, and having, you know, a hip so tight that I couldn't have sex and all this crazy shit that I put my body through in the name of just getting stronger and having a bigger deadlift and a bigger squat and a bigger bench press and a bigger overhead press and doing a bunch of muscle ups and crushing CrossFit workouts. Like the question for me is like, what is my actual goal? What do I want? And more specifically, why do I want it? And what I found is that most people's goals are socially programmed. It's just a social hypnosis.
Yeah, it really wasn't even that deep for me. I'm just like, everyone's doing squats, everyone's doing deadlifts. Those are the lifts, according to the science. Even they're the, you know, what to go to, right? The question whether you should go to 90 degrees or full depth, all that, but most are in agreement that those are the way to strength train. And if you get good at those lifts, it's going to cross over to everything. So I'm like, hey, I may as well lift as much as I can. And, you know, I'm naturally strong, so I went towards that way, right? So it's like, why not deadlift, you know, super heavy amounts? Why not squat super heavy amounts? I'm going to be able to do everything better, but it just didn't play out like that in real life. You know, there was like some people would say you were doing it too much or you were lifting too much. Yeah, probably. My time would have been better spent from that last like 25% I was getting from going from like a 400-pound squat to a 500-pound squat. I would have better went down to like 200 pounds and then worked on other things, used that energy to work on other things, gait mechanics, releasing tensions in my body, things like that, right? However, you learn these things when you're a little older, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember Ido Portal talking about the more you specialize, the more price you have to pay. Like the more, and that was his philosophy around being a movement generalist, was it's this idea that like if you're just deadlifting, then you're going to be linear and rigid. If you're just a capoeira artist, then you're gonna miss out on other elements of movement. And for him, movement wasn't necessarily about aligning to the body's natural mechanics, but it was about creating as much freedom to do whatever the hell your body wanted to do at any given moment. He did a lot of progressive tissue training. He did a lot of, like even the shaking thing I learned from Ido Portal, like the shaking to release tension, and like how loose and limber can you shake your muscles, and how relaxed can you actually get. That principle was something that I learned from him. Now, movement generalism is an interesting concept because the movement culture, quote unquote, has a different mindset around movement than maybe you and I are talking about, because they're talking about, again, creating freedom of creative movement and movement that's more applicable to dance and different flow and moving around on your hands. And, they're not as concerned as staying in the back chain because they're doing a lot of back bending and these sort of like reverse movements. But I think there's something to be said for recognizing that the more you specialize in one physical pursuit, the more price your body is going to pay, because you teach your body to behave with whatever input that you give it.
It's very interesting what you just said. I think we've all spent a little bit of time, well, I have anyway, learning Ido Portal method and playing on the ground, doing the capoeira style spins on the ground. That was so fun. I loved it, right? However, you are specializing there. You're specializing in groundwork. There was a price to pay. I did get a little bit injured doing that, shoulders, catching yourself. I came from a lifting background where I was making myself super stiff, so going straight there was a mistake. We're kind of the middle ground, I would say. Most of what we do, like, it's gait mechanics, and I can do complex motions on my feet, though. When I get to the ground, it's a lot more simple, okay? Because I'm not that hyper specialized there. I don't want to be hyper specialized at spinning and on my head, or doing complex motions on the ground. I don't need to do that. However, I see the value in ground work. Okay. I want my specialization to be more on the feet, because I'm on the feet 95% of the time. Okay. So I'd say that's the difference between the specialization that Ido Portal shows and where we're going, or where I'm going with my movement.
I think what we're doing is specializing in what the human body is naturally specialized to do. Right. Ultimately, yeah. That's what our movement practice is trying to align to, is what is the human body specialized to do? Orient our training around that. Stand, walk, run, throw, like the FP Big Four that Naudi talks about. That's like biologically, there's theories that human beings evolved we are unique to other apes in our capacity to throw. Our shoulder mechanics are different from other apes in that we can throw things, and the fact that we could throw things made us extremely good hunter-gatherers, and that was a basis for human evolution, right? And so part of human biomechanics is the ability to throw versus maybe the ability to brachiate, like swinging from a tree and stuff. Like we don't have that. We do have some brachiation function. We've talked about this in other episodes. We have some brachiation function in our shoulders, but compared to the mechanics of throwing, our shoulders are more specialized to throw than they are to brachiate. And we're more specialized to run and walk than we are to throw. So, in terms of we're ordering in terms of priority. Ido Portal's real philosophy, like even though a lot of the stuff outwardly is the capoeira, it's the groundwork, like I worked with an Ido Portal practitioner, and we talked at length about the actual philosophy behind it. You're not supposed to specialize in it. Like if you end up specializing in capoeira, you end up specializing in the groundwork, then you're not really in the spirit of a movement practice. You're too generalized. And for them, it was like trying to avoid generalization at all possible costs. It was like you want to spend a lot of time hanging, you want to spend a lot of time on your hands, you want to spend a lot of time, moving around and having like the elasticity and doing everything. It's generalization, but the thing is, like when you generalize that much, you still have to end up prioritizing things to a degree, right? So you do end up taking, even if you're doing, you're periodizing your movement practice, where it's like, okay, for 3 months I'm going to practice hand balancing. For 3 months I'm going to practice brachiation. For 3 months I'm going to, hyper focus in on my capoeira or my florio training. Then you end up, you're still specializing in aspects so that you can be a movement generalist as defined by the movement culture. We're prioritizing in terms of like what the body prioritizes. Again, it's that alignment to nature as opposed to creating a diverse range of movements that you think you should be able to do based on, a social perception or a tribal perception established by the movement culture.
Well, I do want to be a generalist as well, right? But sticking to the foundations of being on your feet for the vast majority of the time, I want to be able to be 80% of the way there to be able to do any activity. So I want to be able to keep up with a trail runner, a high-level trail runner. I may not be able to beat them, but I can keep up. Somebody who can, like a boxer, a really good boxer, I should be able to keep up. However, I'm not going to be the best boxer in the world. Same with a sprinter. I'm going to be able to keep up, but probably won't be the fastest sprinter. But I'm able to do all these things because I have the base for it. And that's what I'm going for. Okay. If I want to hyper specialize in something temporarily, I can practice that. However, I never want to get into something so much that I'm taking away from the foundations.
One of the GOTA coaches, Bam, made a really cool analogy of movement and nutrition, where someone was like, "Oh, is it really good for you to be spending all that time on your hands if you're talking about GOTA?" And like, he's like, the way I look at it is, if you eat a bit of junk food when you're eating 95% of the time, you're eating, really good foods, healthy foods. Eating a chocolate bar is not going to kill you, but if you're eating mostly chocolate and donuts and stuff, you're going to give yourself diabetes and make yourself obese. In the same way, it's like, Bam is doing mostly GOTA movements, and he's prioritizing his natural mechanics, and he's doing the groundwork, and he's training GOTA 95% of the time, but he also has, he gets enjoyment out of doing handstands, some gymnastic stuff, and some stuff that's maybe putting him in the front chain or whatever. It's the level of priority. And it's like the 80-20 thing. If 80% of the time you're doing things that are respecting your biomechanics, and 20% of the time you're investing, a little bit of specialized training in something else, but you're still, the way that you train other than that is specifically honoring your biomechanics and keeping you loose and limber and decompressed, then you're not going to do the same level of damage than if you were just doing, maybe like hard gymnastics training or deadlifting all the time.
Absolutely. If I see a gymnastics, if I go to Venice Beach or something like that, and I see a playground, like I used to have so much fun going where, you can swing off swings, bars, rings, all that stuff is there for you to play with. It's like, I should be able to do that, have some fun, do some gymnastics, and go back to the principles afterwards for recovery and the general basis of my training.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's, with the art of move, because movement is like, it's everything. It's what we do. It's like living in a body. We just have to move. We're naturally moving. Like, I think what we're trying to do is we're establishing the truth of biomechanics and how the body is meant to move, which ultimately, the more you align to that, the more freedom you have to explore movements in a way that's not going to hurt you. And it's basically, we're creating a template for people to expand out of. If you make that your template, then expanding out in terms of movement complexity over time is going to be a lot easier. It's going to cause less tissue degeneration, and you're just going to, you're going to enjoy having a healthy body for a longer period of time. And on that note, guys, I'd love to wrap up this episode just to recap everything that we kind of talked about. Well, I can't, because we went everywhere today. It was really, really fun. We talked about the spinal engine. We talked about fluidity of movement. We talked about, generalizing your movement practice and trying to align to nature. We kind of went a little philosophical. What was your favorite thing that we talked about today? For those who are listening, I would love to know.
Yeah, for me, it was, I love the spinal engine, right? Like, there's not enough info on this. And I probably have the largest collection of spinal info or spinal engine info on the internet, and I hardly have any. You know what I mean? My 3 Instagram posts and what we've done here. And other than Serge Gregakevsky himself, which, by the way, that's who created or discovered spinal engine and coined that term. That's who to look for. Serge Gregakevsky. He has a great couple lectures on YouTube, a book that is so expensive. It's like a couple $100. So try to find his lecture, which you can find and get it photocopied from one of the, I can't remember what site it is, but I have a spinal engine. It's basically the slides from his lecture on YouTube, going in a little bit more in depth. Okay, so Serge Gregakevsky is who to look for there. Philip Beach has a little bit on spinal engine. Check my Instagram for my earlier Instagram TV stories. I'll probably post another couple on this. And Born to Walk is a good book by James Earls. Yeah.
Well, we should make an Art of Move website so that we can have resources outside of the podcast. We will also include some of the reading suggestions in the description of this episode. If you guys want to hear more, you can follow and you want to ask specific questions, you want to hear episodes on specific topics, you can follow me at The Body Moves on Instagram and Will at The Art of Move on Instagram. You can also message us on there. You can also email me at media@nofilter.net. And then, this is supposed to be an open forum of conversation. We've had a few guests on, or we've talked a little bit, and we'd love to get more people on. You can actually use the knock button on No Filter to request to join the stream yourself and join in on the conversation. So if you're listening to this podcast and you want to be on the podcast, you want to be part of the discussion, please join us and come check out what we have to say and contribute to what we're saying, because this is, we don't want to become an echo chamber of just Will and I talking about the same ideas over and over, even though we're constantly trying to learn from other people, constantly reading new material, constantly checking out other ideas. Actually having discussion, I find, is the most rapid way for us to expand our consciousness. So if you ever want to join on and participate in the discussion yourself, feel free to do that. And we're going to invite more guests on in the future. Thank you for listening, guys. This was episode 27 of the Art of Move podcast. Leave us a review if you liked us, and subscribe on Spotify. And you can check out our next live episode on nofilter.net if you want to see this live in action and participate yourself. Thanks for listening, guys.
Thanks. Movement is the medicine. Have a good one, guys.